see me days on you.
No.
Hey, don't put me on. I don't want to be on TV. I don't want to be on TV. All right, welcome to the Shakopee Community Center. This is the senior programs. I'm Carla Kress, and I run all the programs for active older adults, 55 plus. I've been toying with that name, so we are active older adults. So Dave's going to put on a great presentation. I want to thank you all for coming. This was great. This is wonderful. So there's information that I'll have out there you can take in the kiosk when you leave. So thanks for coming, and hopefully spring has arrived. And if Dave doesn't keep this up to his mouth, feel free to go, Mike, Mike. He likes to talk like this.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm David Schleper. Just so you know, I do have shorts on because basically I believe you start at Easter and you go until Thanksgiving. And then you switch. And so I follow the rules. I've been doing it for 3 years. It makes me feel like it's coming. Spring is coming, believe it or not.
But the same pair of shorts, huh?
Okay. Just so you know, I grew up in Shakopee. Started when I was 2 years old. We moved here in 1962. And so I grew up in Shakopee until high school. When I finished high school, I headed to Australia, then Colorado, then Washington, D.C., Honolulu, Hawaii, several places. And eventually, I ended up back here, believe it or not. Mostly because I wanted to come back. My mom had Alzheimer's, and I wanted to come and help out. But in the whole process, and even since growing up, I always remember the Women's Reformatory, as we called it. I remember it because even with my mom, when I came back, we used to drive her around, and we'd always stop and drive by there, and I'd always say, "That's where you're going." And she'd laugh, but she didn't realize we were serious. But anyway, but it was a place that we all remember because it was over. At one point, it was at the edge of town, and eventually, of course, the town kind of grew around it. And so today, I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the place. But, you know, I could go on for a long time on this because I've been doing a lot of reading, and there's a lot of information about the place. It's also really interesting to hear a little bit about some of the people who were there, some of them who escaped, some who came back, and some who did not, and the people who worked there also. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of information today, but it won't be everything, but it'll be a good start. And I'll start by one of the inmates who said, "We are not saints, we're just a bunch of hurting, broken people looking for a way to put pieces of our lives back together again." And it's really interesting because you know what year the Reformatory was opened? Does anybody know? 40s? No. That's a good guess though, but no. 20s is much closer because it actually was 1920 was the day, the time that it opened. But what's really interesting is this woman. And this was Isabel Davis Higby. She didn't live in Shakopee, okay? She was born in Vermont, and she became a teacher at age 14. That's what they did it back then. She was very smart. She went through all her programs, and so she ended up becoming a teacher. And then she moved to Minneapolis in 1870, I think it was. And she taught, and then she became a principal in Minneapolis. And then at one point, she married Chester in 1876. Now the reason that she's so important is, and here's a picture of her when she was quite a bit older. And it was interesting, and if you can't see, yeah, move around, you know, it won't bother me, so. There's some places over here that's supposed to, where it's focused to. Okay. She really, one of her big thing was she used to speak a lot. And she used to talk about the needs for the women and the children in Minnesota. And she really focused on the poor and the downtrodden. And I think at one point she said that there were times when individual efforts was sufficient, you know, if they would just use that for their social needs. But she said now it has grown more complex and they needed an organization, and it was necessary. And so we know that she actually worked with a group of about 50 other women who were like, if you want to really say, I would say they're kind of those really rich, white women who have a lot of money, usually because their husbands are doctors or rich people in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But they worked on trying to do things good. And so she went and she ended up got the first school for girls at the Sauk Center in 1907. And then for 20 years she worked to try to get a place for women for a prison. For 20 years they would go and speak and ask for a place, because the women, for the most part, they were either put into Stillwater prison for men. They'd have a small little group of women there, or more often they would just put them in the correctional person's house, and they would live there for a while, and then they get rid of them. Okay, but there really was nothing to do, but they knew that they needed something. And so they kept trying, but every time they went to the Senate and asked, they were turned down. And so, on March 4th, 1915, she and 50 other women went to the Capitol to testify. Again, this is after the 20th time she's going. But what's really interesting, at that same day, in the morning, they turned down again the rights for women to vote. So they were not allowed to vote still, but they allowed them to speak, okay, for this. In fact, it took another 5 years before they actually were able to vote, okay? And so she faced the men in the committee room, and it really was kind of like a gulf between custom, law, and privilege. And she spoke. And she said, women should not be in this Stillwater prison. She felt women needed a special place to provide a humane and healthy environment that would help them return to society as contributive members. What a great idea, right? You know, at that time it was the opposite was really happening, especially for the men. And then she said, and this was her quote, she said, "We must give the women fresh air, God's glorious sunshine, and as much freedom as is consistent with discipline. I shall trust your judgment to accord us a women's reformatory." And then Isabel sat down, she started coughing, she fell back, and she died. Right there. Okay. It was 9:15 p.m. Snow was falling. A doctor was called, but she had died. And what happened afterwards got the prison. Because afterwards, the next day, the front page of all the newspapers in Minnesota, there was an article about her, about what she was doing, what happened, when it happened, you know, the whole thing. And it was such a big thing that I think the men were like, oh, I guess we got to do something this time. Okay. In fact, I think there's one person who said, no man can refuse us the reformatory when it is realized that women are willing to give up their life for it. It works. So just in case you need to do anything, I know what to do. But so because of that, so even Isabel is not something that you would remember. She never lived here. Her memory has gone on because of what happened here. And so because of that, they purchased 167 acres of land at the edge of Shakopee. Now when I say edge of Shakopee, I'm not talking about the edge of Shakopee now, but we're talking about way back when. And at that time, 9th or 10th Avenue was pretty much, really probably 9th Avenue was pretty much the cutoff at that time. I just know for me, when I grew up in '62, it was still, we never went beyond 10th Avenue. But there was just fields. It kind of was before that, okay. But so they got the area, so it's a large area, and they worked on building the thing, and the reformatory started in 1920. Yeah, so that gives a picture. It's not the best. I realize some of these pictures look better on my computer than on yours, so I guess I didn't pick the right ones. But anyway, so here's the main thing in 1920. And what's interesting is this was kind of the administrative building, and guess what it was called? Isabel Higby Hall. In fact, there was a plaque that was up there. So it's just interesting that tie-in. So even though Isabel Higby Hall, Isabel Higby is not someone who was ever here, but she is a big part of Shakopee's history because of what she did. And so they built that first, that building, and then they built 3 other buildings right next to those ones. And they were called, just so you know, the first one was called Anna Howard Shaw Cottage, also built in 1920. And who is Anna Howard Shaw? Well, she was related kind of to the work of women's rights in America. And the other one was Maria Stanford Cottage, which was built in 1922. Okay. And the next one was the Susan B. Anthony Cottage. That was built in 1925, I should say. So you kind of know who she is, I would guess, probably, or more people would be. So if you look at the buildings, so here would be the Higby Hall. Over here would be the Shaw Cottage. And this would be important because this is what later became, for a while, was for people who had disabilities. And they lived there. And there's more, we'll talk about that later. And then we have the Stanford Cottage and the Susan B. Anthony Cottage. Okay? So that's kind of what it was for a long time. It's not there now. It's gone completely, I think. But I think there's one place for parking or something there, but that's about it. But if you look at where it is, you know where this is, right? Everybody? Yeah. You got it. Okay. So the first superintendent was Florence Monahan. And she was a superintendent here from 1919, when just before it started, until 1932. So it was kind of a nice long time that had one person there. And she was good. And what's interesting about her, there's actually now a new cottage in the new part called after her. Okay. And the first 4 people who came here, they have started going groups of 4, and then more, and then more and more, until they got about 40 or so. The first 4 were arrived from Stillwater Prison, okay, on February 2nd, 1920. The first one was Marie. She murdered her husband. She probably had a reason for it. And she was, when she arrived, they gave her the job of becoming the cook. Okay? And then the next one, they called her Old Rose. Okay. I told my mom she was the young Rose, but anyway. She said she was addicted to dope and drink. And she became the seamstress. Okay? And then Addie, the next one, she was a prostitute, a shoplifter, and a drug addict. And she became the scrub woman and the housekeeper. And finally, Frances. She was a shoplifter and a prostitute, and she became a waitress. And eventually, as they kept adding more, they would put in the same 4 areas, okay? And basically, we knew that they worked 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. And they were all taught housework, how to do everything from making your beds to cleaning, that kind of stuff. Because he said so many of them had no clue, that they didn't know because they never had those experiences before. So they really were getting kind of in a regimen, this is what you need to do. And also some of them worked on the farmstead. Because remember, even though they had those buildings, beyond that, which is Sweeney Elementary School, and the fields, and the swimming pool, and part of the Catholic cemetery. Okay, that area used to be the farmstead, and so people would take care of chickens and pigs. They'd milk the cows, shocking the grain, weeding asparagus, and picking vegetables and fruits, including strawberries and gooseberries. Okay? And much of what they were collected, they then used within that group. So here's a picture, and this is where I realize it's a little back, but anyway, this is 1927, but you see, here's the building there, the barn, and people are there, and I'll show you a better picture. So here, if you look at where this was the area that became the farm area. Okay. And women worked. Okay. Now, it's not a bad thing to do. I think, again, for people, the idea that they started is they want to make sure that they got enough experience so that they'll be ready when they could get out, that they could go and do the same things. Okay. And so there's the pigs. And again, it's not the best thing. This would be 6th Avenue here. And there would be the farms here. And of course we have the big barn. And feeding the chickens. And working. Okay. Yes, they did. There was a man who was the person in charge, and then he had an assistant, and all the rest of it was the women's. So that was a lot of work. But it was a good thing in many ways what they did. We knew that, yes.
Do you know if the state built all the farm buildings, or did they buy a farm and utilize what is there?
You know, that's a good question. I believe it was a little combination of both, is what I think. But I had the same question: is the farm that was there already there, and they just took over that area, or not? There's nothing that I found about it. My guess is that there was probably a farm there. Just because I know that that area was all farms, but it could be that they had built it there. Anybody may know, but anyway.
Did they have any problem building this building in Shakopee?
When it
Any
first,
adversary?
you know, actually no, because the question is, were people upset when they were going to build the place here? Believe it or not, because it was such a small number of people who lived here, it was at the edge of town, and because it was jobs, and the jobs was the biggest thing. People needed jobs, and so this was a place where there would be several people who would have to work there, and so that's why people were very supportive of it. It still is, even like today, people for the most part are supporting it. There are some who believe it should be moved way out of town. But I'm like, where? And it's just going to fill in anyway, you know. But that is what people, you know, have said more recent when I read some of the articles. But for the most part, it's just been there, and it will probably always will be.
Dave,
Okay. Yes.
how did Shakopee get selected for the state institution?
Well, that was a part of really working really hard with the legislators, because they were trying to find different places. They picked Shakopee because they felt that there was a lot of land and it was open, the free area, and that's what they knew, that's what they wanted. So they were able to get it at a pretty good price at that time, because you're talking about 1918, 1919. But I'm guessing there were probably some people in town here who were trying to push that also, I would guess. I'm guessing probably there were other places around the state who also wanted it there, because no matter where you go, you know, it gives you some money. It's kind of interesting because I was reading about, just in the paper recently, about the place for mental health children or something in one place, and they turned it down or whatever. And people keep saying, but you don't understand, people need it, and it's lots of jobs, you know, and that's the thing, and I'm sure that's the thing here, what probably happened. They had, when it was set up, each of the cottage had 21 people in each one. So that's not a lot of people, okay? And so that helped a lot too, because you have people working, but in kind of small units. They had a sewing room, which was used by every woman, because every woman had to learn how to sew. I remember when I was in high school in Țakpe, I had to learn how to sew too. It didn't work very well. I mean, but I understand the why. It makes so much sense, you know, now I think, you know, how do I do a button? You need to learn how to do that, you know. But anyway, at that time, they made it dresses, coats, underwear, and everything else used by the place here in Shakopee. Plus, they did for others, and this was in the 15-month period, the first 15 months. They sewed 906 dresses, 134 winter coats, 972 boys' underwear, 240 pairs of bloomers. Hey, they needed it back then? Okay. 564 nightgowns, 48 work shirts, and 12 baby bonnets for the Owatonna State School. Plus, and that's not it, they also did 680 shirts, 560 night shirts, 600 union suits, and 180 night counts for the hospital for the insane. Where is that located? Here, I think it's the one that they're talking about. I think so too.
There's one in Fergus Falls.
And there's one in Fergus Falls too. Yeah, I do remember that too. So anyway, that's what at that time, it was interesting. And they said that happened within 15 months. So that's just the kind of stuff that happened. In other words, they're not only helping clothing for what they needed, but they're also doing other things for other people. Now, we talk about the sewing thing, and it's kind of interesting because I had this, Mary, one of the person who would go online and talk a lot, she was talking, she said, I had to make a confession. She said, many years ago when I was in 4-H, I would say that I was about 14 years old or so. I was in the process of making a dress to be entered into the state fair. I ran into a snag, and one of the inmates finished my dress. What a nice thing to do. She didn't have to, but she wanted to, and she did an exceptional job. And I was questioned with reference to the details of the workmanship. I believe they knew that it was not something that I had learned at my own in 4-H. She said, I must say that I have never forgotten her nor her kindness. I don't remember her name or what she looked like. So it's kind of just interesting when you look about how the people in Shakopee and the connection back and forth. And I remember doing this too, but here they talk about with the Girl Scouts. Cheryl Ryan said that the Girl Scouts we visited and had a Christmas party for them. We brought cookies and little gifts we made, and we sang songs for them. And that was very common. When I grew up, that was very common that they were doing. That happened. And Mary Schultz also mentioned, she said she remembered her father worked for the State Reformatory for Women for many years and retired there as well. My dad was such a good man and treated the women with respect. My mom would take myself, my brothers and sisters to the Reformatory on Halloween, dressed up in Grandma and Grandpa's clothes. We would sing songs for the women housed in each house. Most of them had children of their own, so it was a real treat for them. And I think that was the other thing that you'd see happen a lot in the past, especially the connection back and forth with that. And if you look in terms of what the building, what it looked like, I think she had, when it was started, they had $7,000 to build, to get all of the furniture. Now, when I look at this stuff, I just know enough about this. This is worth a lot of money now. But anyway. They're not there now anymore, by the way, but anyway.
What if a girl came there and she was expecting?
Yes, we'll talk about that, but yes, what if someone was expecting? I'm not sure. Remember, I have a stroke, so sometimes I can't say the right word. Was she pregnant? Yes, that did happen, and there's a whole process now where they have doulas who come and help them, and they actually give their birth right there at the place. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay. But again, they're doing their laundry, their other stuff, and you just kind of see what the place kind of looked like. But really, this is my thing. This is funny when you look at this. Of course, you look at that their heads are turned because they didn't want to have their faces, and all that kind of stuff. But I just look at the furniture and go, ooh, that's some good stuff. But that must be because I must be thinking about that recently. But anyway, okay. You have to look at that and say, that has to be pretty good furniture. All right. They didn't have that much money, but they must have got. But I know that what they said is that there were no guns or guard towers or prison walls. Nevertheless, Florence and Monahan observed, one thing makes the place a prison. All inmates must rise, dress, eat, sleep, study, work, play, and retire at another person's will. And that was really what made it different. And so eventually there would be new superintendents. So just, here's the first, a few more that came through, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. And each one, most of them stayed for a while, which helped, I think, a lot. Later, at the very end, they would switch them much more often, and that necessarily, I don't think that was very helpful. So, here's one of the people who was an inmate. This is Ruth Gardiner in 1933, maybe. Now, her name was Ruth Gardiner, or Laura Jensen, or Ruth Redke, or Ruth Warner. Okay? And she escaped on February 20th, 1933. She was 22 years old, 5 feet 6 5/8 inches, and 109 pounds. She had light brown hair, hazel eyes, and a sallow complexion. Why did she have so many names? It's called being smart. If you're trying, you can switch to different names. It's like nowadays you have license and people will have different licenses. By law, they're not supposed to have one, but they'll have several ones because each one they can use for different things. It's a way to take advantage of the system. Ruth was a forger. Okay. And she operated in Ohio and Michigan and Minnesota. She always presented her victims with a fake letter from an insurance company. And they had forged checks, was usually about $70. And she'd ask them to cash them and stuff. So I just know this because I found this one time on a thing, and I got a copy of her little folder that says all about her. And just for you to know, if you find her, deliver her to the offices of the Minnesota State Reformatory for Women in Shakopee. You will get $25 reward. And again, I put this in just because I think it's interesting to see. And there were people, and she escaped, and she was never, I don't think, ever brought back. But we do know that many of them, even recently, have escaped. And they almost always get back within half an hour, which is just really interesting. Partly probably because they were watching for that kind of thing. But anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Here's Kathy Jefferson mentioned, she said, every now and then the ladies, the inmates, would play softball. And many of you remember this probably too. I remember that. Okay. They formed a team and they would play ball with other of the Shakopee ladies teams. Someone was at the Lions tap team, I think, was involved with this too. But this guy says, my uncle was an umpire. When the inmates would run the bases, the Shakopee team pretty much moved out of the way and let them pass. One of the inmates told the second baseman that I killed my old man and I'll kill you too. I hope she was kidding, she says, but I would never know. She didn't want to take a chance. And I think that's pretty much what we remember. Because there was no fence, they were playing softball. And we would walk by and they would say, you want to play? Because they needed some people to play. And we would just play with it. And it was fun, it was like just regular softball kind of thing. It's just kind of interesting story about that. Does anybody else remember the kind of similar thing? Yes. Yeah, so, okay. Yeah, so that's my guess. I mean, I think it's, yeah, you remember that kind of thing, yeah. And what do you remember about it?
Well,
I remember once when my girls were playing a team. The one of the runners was running with a bat in her hand. She said, "Oh, don't worry about her. She's only in there for murder."
Now, the thing is, you don't know whether that's real or they just made it, you don't know either. It's part of the fun, too, probably. What were you saying?
Art Cohn used to, many of you remember Art Cohn? He would go up there once a week in the fall, and he would supervise the game, and one time Art couldn't make it, so he asked me if I would take over. And so I went, and fortunately the girls and the ladies all knew what to do.
Yeah.
So I was kind of the umpire,
Yeah.
an umpire there, but they looked at me, I was a young kid, and they knew some of these gals were pretty tough, but they just kind of laughed. One time, somebody hit the ball, and the ball, I'll never forget it, the ball bounced and hit the second baseman in the crotch area, and they just bent over and laughed. But yeah, that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, they know that those who were doing, like playing softball, they have, there's a level that you reach in order to do things like that. And so, I don't know if they were in for murder or something, but even if they were, they had to reach a certain level where they were allowed to do that. And research said that they used to do, they used to take groups of them after the first 2 years there. Those who were doing well would go and they go on a picnic on the Minnesota River, walk around through the trees and stuff, and then come back. So in other words, they weren't so worried. They knew that they were going to come back, and they knew most of them would, so it wasn't such of a problem. It was only a few that would not do so well. Okay. And then the other thing that was really interesting is the Cottage, which became the Shakopee Home for Children. That started in 1951, and it continued until 1969. At that time, people who were mentally retarded is what they would call them. They used to say that if they were really not able to do well, parents would often give them away. They didn't want to keep them at their home. So they would go and they would live someplace. And in this situation, they had like 30 girls would come here. They were from ages 4 to 12. And they lived in a cottage there, okay? And there were 10 staff members who moved there who were specifically working with them, plus 10 inmates also. So that was like 20 people for the 30, okay? Which is really kind of a good number, really. But it also, it really became kind of a rehabilitation for the inmates, because they learned about other people in a different way. And tied into that, I know that Jerry Regan, who, the Scott County Drug Store, which is on First Avenue, now it's Sports Style, Ellie, okay? He used to, every Sunday, you remember they used to have Bridgman ice cream there? Ooh, that was good. People loved that. But every Sunday, they would take 2 buckets of ice cream, and they would bring it to the hall for the place, and the children would have ice cream every Sunday. And they'd really look forward to that. So it's kind of just a good thing where you talk about the family and the community and what they were doing. And it really was a great thing where there's real connection at the same time, between the family, the Reagan family, as well as the people that were living there. And then finally, Carla, which is one of the inmates, she said that she remembered about this, and she said, when I went to work, it was a dream come true. To someone, I am very, very important. It's not important to these retarded children that I committed a crime. It is important that I can wipe away tears and kiss a cut. That makes me feel very special, and that is how the home has helped me. And so this really was a good thing. But at the same time, nationwide, they said, well, you know, people who have are not doing so well, they wanted to move them out of a place like that into the public schools. And so that's what eventually happened, and that's why it then was closed down. But it's just kind of interesting that that kind of thing happened. Another thing that was really common was the Braille Project. And they had people, they started, I think, with 5 people who were inmates that learned from the Library of Congress, and then they got a certificate on volunteer Braille transcriptions, okay? And they said that they transcribed more than 35,000 pages of text, including 55 textbooks, including things on Aristotle, phonics, physicians, all of that in 1 year. And so that was the thing that happened for quite a while. It went from 1956 to 1966, then it stopped, and then it started again from 1991 until 2001, okay? And they said that over 20 years of service, they worked for people with blind. So again, the idea was good because it's basically the inmates there are learning a skill. It's a skill that's very useful, and at the same time, they're helping the world, which is what they really should be doing. All right. And then the farm that we just talked about earlier, the farm. That started right away, so it started in 1920, and it continued until 1957. There was a person who was the farm supervisor, Nick. He was a supervisor for 37 years, from March 23rd, 1920 until his retirement in 1957. And again, the farm itself was about 160 acres. And so they sold part of it to the city of Shakopee, some to Scott County, and some to St. Mark's Cemetery. Okay, so now when you go there now, you'll see you have the cemetery is expanded because of that. You've got the ball fields, you've got Sweeney School, okay? And they kept 36 acres of land from the original farm, and that became the place of the new institution that's there now, which is right across the street. So on 6th Avenue, where you have the old Reformatory, which now is not there anymore, right across the street, there's still an area, it's just not there's no buildings on that. Right across the street is the new one. And again, looking again at superintendents, you have Ruby, you have first Man. He was there for 1.5 years or something. You know, he was like, what the heck? No, they did say that after it was just, he said, this is just not right for me. Okay. And then Jackie, and Jackie was really important because she was there for a long time and had a really big impact on the place also. And that's a picture of her. She's small, she's like 5'5", I think. She's not very big, but she was very good at what she did. Yeah.
You mentioned superintendent. They weren't called wardens, is there?
No. They weren't called wardens. Sometimes people would call them that, but technically their names were superintendent. And I think that was trying to broaden the concept so that it's not just a prison guard kind of thing. I kind of like it, but I think now, I think they still kind of go back and forth a little bit, so I'm not sure. Okay.
Dave?
Yes.
Jackie Fleming worked with Shakopee School District and helped us to automate all of the elementary, junior high, and senior high libraries by entering bibliographic data into computers, and that was a big help because that would have been very expensive to do otherwise.
Yes, they've done, has done a lot, mostly because she was really smart in that she said, what do you want to do? And she asked the other people who worked there, and they said, what about this, or what about a grant for this, or this is, and then she said, sure, let's do it. And she was very open to that, and because of that, yeah, things like that for the public schools. I know she did the Shakopee story, the actual book that we had that was reprinted the third time. That was all typed by the inmates at the Reformatory. For free for them, I mean for us, I should say. They had to do the work, okay?
Dave, there was two people.
Two people who did that, yeah. So it's just interesting that kind of thing happened. One thing they did, I know, was the Canine Companions for Independence. And they actually brought puppies in. I think it was mostly one at a time. And they would teach them from babies all the way up and taught them how to work with people who had disabilities. But then it got stopped. But I did recently read that it's still going on, a new thing maybe. So I'm not sure about that. I have to find out more. But anyway. But I think that what Jackie did generally was she was there for a long time, but she was very open to letting people try something new and do different things. And superintendents, now this is not I'll correct the last part, but I know that this is the current one, this woman, okay? But I don't know exactly when she started, okay? And we do know that there was a couple men that were in there again, okay? But we do know that, again, across the street from 6th Avenue, the new prison was open, and that was in 1986. And, you know, we used to call it the Women's Reformatory or whatever. That was kind of what we called it, I don't know. But it's actually technically called the Minnesota Correctional Facility, Shakopee. And we knew that the old place could hold up to 60 people, but it was up to 90 people when they had to move across the street. So it was getting really crowded, and that was probably the biggest concern. And because of that, so many people, they were having more problem with people running away and things like that. Probably because of that, because they started having people in two bunk beds and stuff like that. It was just too much, okay. But the new prison included 5 units for 132 people, okay? And the names of the units include Isabel Higby, remember her, okay, the one who started the whole thing by dying, okay? We have Susan B. Anthony, Eleanor Roosevelt, Harriet Tubman, and the Independent Living Center at that time. And of course, you know what it looks like now. This is without the fence. And where is it located? So it's located between 6th and 10th Street. And what's the side street? Adams, and Marystown Road. Adams Road in that area. In fact, if you know Sweeney School, remember where that is? It's just right across the street. Now there's a fence around it. Before it looked like a little campus, so, you know, who knew what was going on, right? And it's, you know, here's a picture with the Shakopee thing in the background. And here's kind of what it looked like inside, just so you know, once it was redone. That was pretty new. It's not as much now, but you see again the thing with, you know, with 2 people. And there's a place for them to work. And there was a lot then of things that happened since then. So they would have a special place where kids could come and could stay there on certain weekends if they were at a they ended up, they added the Margaret Mead Mental Health Unit in 1994, and 2 other 45-bed living units, Mary McLuhan Bethune and Ignacio Broker, were open August and September of 1994. And we do know that they continue to grow. So in the 30s and the 40s, the numbers went down. There were like about 40 people there. And so they were even talking about maybe they should just close it or move it somewhere else or something. And then 50s, 60s, then suddenly the amount started growing and growing and growing. And so that's why when they move it to the other side, now there's over 600 people who are inmates there. So it's a big change, right? And the most recent one that I know of was named after Florence Monahan, which was the first superintendent. And she said, unless a woman herself wishes to change, no improvement can be made to her character. You just can see the area. And if you look in terms of what are the people there, what's their background in terms of this, it's just interesting that mostly they're related to drugs, property crimes, counterfeiting, okay? Homicide, about 10%, let's say. And DWI was about 6%. And 3% were sex-related crimes, okay? And that amount is almost the same as when it first was started. The amount has grown, but very similar things are happening. And it's also just interesting because about 60% of the people who are inmates now are white. And then there's pretty big amount, this number here is Native American. And so they've been doing a lot of work on that, even within the prison, and there are special places and sweat lodges, things like that that are happening to help with that kind of stuff. And then black, and then Asian. And so here's a couple fun little things I remember. This was in 1998. This teen, she was 17 years old. She escaped because she wanted to go watch the Smashing Pumpkins. Hey, you know, if you're 17 years old, what's important, okay? So they said she wanted to see it, so she was serving a 12-year sentence for second-degree murder. But she just walked off the campus at that time and joined 100,000 fans to see the show in Minneapolis. And she was arrested by midnight. So she was there, left, I think, in the morning. She was back by midnight, okay? And she moved her then to the segregated unit, okay? Because there's where you can do anything, you could get out, and this one probably she can't get out, okay? But it's just kind of a fun story. And another one that's really interesting is Lucille. And she became an inmate when she was 88 years old. And she was there for 5 years. She was living, it was kind of maybe her boyfriend, but he was a couple, like about 20 years younger. And she paid for everything. And he didn't do anything. So she said at one point she just shot him. In the back. He didn't. He was living afterwards. I mean, you know, he got shot, but he didn't die. Okay. But anyway, so that she got in 2002. She moved in. They called her grandma. All the inmates called her grandma. And when she got out, it's also kind of interesting, when she was 93, the first thing she wanted to do was go to Perkins. Which I just think is kind of cute. And this was kind of because she was the oldest women in prison in the United States. Okay. Believe it or not. And then finally, we're talking about the fence, because that's the other big thing probably. We know that for a long time, people wanted a fence. Some people wanted a fence. And the people who lived around there either did or did not, depending on individual people. They said it really wasn't necessary. But I know that at one point, a 19-year-old woman escaped with a knife, entered a residence, and threatened 2 children. Okay. But within 25 minutes, they had caught her and brought her back. Okay, and the children were unharmed. But the Shakopee City Council said, we want a fence. And they want a fence with guards, the whole thing, okay? But it didn't happen, okay? But it did become more of a prison as opposed to rehab. They opened more to that. They said maybe about 9 or 10 people escaped a year in the crowded facility. And again, in 1978, the Shakopee City Council said, we want a 10-foot fence topped with barbed wire.
Has that been done then?
What's that?
Was that done then?
Yes, it was eventually. In 2016, they finally added a fence. And they spent over $5.5 million on the fence. Because it had to look, they didn't want like a barbed wire fence, they wanted a nicer fence. Okay. And they have now, the building itself, now there are 10 different buildings on the site, including 6 that are living areas. There's a chemical dependence treatment units, a parenting unit, educational unit, mental health unit. There's a segregated area. There are industrial building, administrative and engineering building. Okay, and that's the place now. I think if you're really interested, I bet if you contact them, they'll let you come and visit. Because my understanding, a lot of you people anyway volunteer there or have volunteered in the past. A lot of church groups and stuff like that have gone there. And a lot of the people there are really nice. And a lot of them are just, like the person said at the very beginning, they're just in the wrong place and trying to get better. And that's, for the most part, what it is still. I know that there's 2 books that are really good information. This one called For the Good of the Woman is a good history of it. It's over there on the thing. You can't have it because it's mine, but it has some good information about that. And there's also where the inmates write poems and stuff, and there's one about a lot from Shakopee that's in there also. So those kind of things are really fun to look at and find out. There's a lot of online nowadays too about this. It's just really an interesting place. Again, just so you know, for the Shakopee Heritage Society, that's the info if you want to find out more. And we continue to add new things coming up. Just so you know, for you guys, this Saturday, we have Murder, Mystery, and Mayhem in early Shakopee, which many of you already, did it here. But we're going to have that at the Shakopee Heritage Society meeting at 1 p.m. at the library. And the next one here in this room is on May 22nd, again 1 to 2 p.m. And that's Home, Sweet Home, Dwellings in early Shakopee. And we'll talk about the first buildings that were here in Shakopee. So please, again, continue to support what's going on. You're happy to, we just do this because we like to have this information out there, and we want it for both for you guys, and also we want it for the children, so that they learn a little bit about the history of Shakopee, because it really is quite an interesting history. And finally, was anyone born on April 11th? Or April 12th? April 13th? 14th? 15th? 16th? 17th? All right. You get the scrapbook today. Okay. And again, every time we have a thing, we usually get someone gets gift also. All right. So, any last questions or comments, please?
Question: how were they fluent on burning wood pellets?
I don't know.
That was really purpose was governor to get the place was built.
Oh, and they would use that, weren't they?
He was from Hibbing, where they
Yeah.
also would
Do that, right.
The great idea was putting this plant to each buildings, burning wood pellets. It never really got off the ground, but the building is there.
They do, I was just to say, I think there still is a building about that. But they don't do it? That's too bad. I think my brother has something that does it in his stove or something. He seems to think it's great too. Okay.
I noticed that you said that the inmates worked the farm. Well, I know when I was in the 50s, when I was a teenager, I worked there. They hired us to work. Did they change, or just maybe they needed extras in the summer, do you know?
I would guess it's probably because of the extra, because there's a lot of work in the farm anyway.
Yeah, we weeded.
Right, things like that. I'm guessing that's the problem.
Because they had a big garden where the prison is now. That was a huge
All
garden.
dark. It was a huge, yeah, it was really very huge. So
Yeah.
that's interesting that you worked there.
Yeah.
Do you remember, were there prisoners there also?
No, it was all just
just
young
there.
people like us, and one Mr. Nodeman, that's
Yeah.
all I remember. That was our supervisor.
Because they still had workers there too from the inmates were also, but I don't know if that was at a separate time or
Yeah,
what. That's a good question. I don't know.
yeah, because I don't know if they were afraid to take them out, you know, then, or what.
I don't think so, because like I said, from really until more recent, and even still, they had a lot of things like people could go and get classes. Now a lot of it's more online and stuff, but
Yeah.
they want people to get a degree or get a GED or things like that, and that happens still. So,
I taught a craft class up there one time.
yeah,
I know that.
yeah.
Do you know if they still have a work release program?
They do, I think, but you know, the problem is that it switches so much from year to year, because they'll have great programs and then they cut them. Like when Jesse Ventura was there, they cut everything, and then they had to slowly bring it back up. So, you know, and so it's hard to say if it's still there or not. They'd have to find out for you for
Well, I
that.
know in the 1980s, I
Yeah.
used to pick an inmate up. Every morning, drive in, early in the morning, it was dark,
Mhm.
and I'd go, and she would come out of the cottage, and I would drive her to Gardiner,
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, and
No one in the company ever knew except for the general manager and myself that she was an inmate.
yeah.
She was a wonderful worker.
Yes, and they did do that. I know that, but I just don't know if it's still like that as much or how. I'm not sure. But yes, they did that all over the place. But it often was not just in Shakopee, but just places around, like you're saying. Yeah.
They have a commercial-sized greenhouse. They have a tennis courts. They have a law library.
They have a really nice library just in
And
general.
they used to have steak on Sunday until somebody found out and called the governor's office, and it was changed. No more steak.
I don't like steak, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, I think that it's interesting just in terms of when it started and the reason what they were doing, and even to now, there are some changes that happen. Probably, I think, because the number of inmates have grown so much. So when you have 650 inmates versus 40, it makes a little bit of difference with that too. But it'd be interesting to see. I know that people still go there and do a lot of programs and stuff there, and there's a lot of churches that do a lot of stuff there all the time. Okay.
Have access to
Dave,
the
one more.
Comedy Central.
Yes.
That was hilarious.
Well, there was this thing on Comedy Central. They were talking about the fence when there wasn't, and there was a huge thing. And I think that was part of the reason that they decided to do a fence. This is too embarrassing. But it really wasn't for you asked the people there who lived around there, and they weren't really worried about it so much. Of course, Mead changed partly as the amount of people gets bigger. People get a little more scared about that too.
Is this the only women's prison in Minnesota?
In Minnesota, yes. And it's, they won a lot of awards throughout because they were doing so many innovative things. So. Okay. Oh, one more question.
So is it full
I think it is. They keep adding on, so they'll add another. They'll keep adding another building, a cottage. Probably soon again because the numbers are going up. They moved some of them to another place for a while. It's the same thing. A lot of people right now is very into putting people in jail right away. It's a quick fix for people, and so that makes it hard. Yes, and they have a good, there's a food camp. There's an article about that in there. And that's really interesting. So there are different things they're trying to do to keep people. Okay, so thanks again. Hope you guys have a good day. Oh, that's right.